Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. Our guest today is Joan Shaver. Joan Shaver is the author of a wonderful new book called Lipstick and Soul. And she is a licensed marriage and family therapist and trauma specialist. You can find out more about Joan Shaver and her wonderful work at her website, lipstickandsoul.com. Welcome, Joan Shaver. Hello.
Hello. Hi. Hi, Catherine, and hi to everybody else that is listening in. I'm really glad to be here today to speak with you, Catherine.
Now, what's so funny is Joan's website is lipstickandsoul.com, and her book is called Lipstick and Soul. And right before our interview, I put on more lipstick and Joan put on her lipstick. And for many of us women, just that simple act of putting on lipstick is an act of self-care, which is what we're going to be talking about today.
That's right.
So, Joan Shaver, in your opinion, what is self-care?
You know, I think that's a question I ask myself pretty much every day. Like, well, what is it? It's like, and it's such an individual question. So when I come back to it, I think what really is important is the idea of self. We're all different, you know, we really are different. And the times are so different. Like, what does self-care mean today in the time of COVID? What did it mean 2 years ago? And just like you said right before the show, I was looking at myself and I'm looking, I'm thinking, oh my God, I look so bland. That's just not going to be working so well. So it's about being very present in the moment and assessing what is going on. So the concept of self-care for me is truly about the self. And I'd like to share a little story because I think that we all have ways where we start over again and we go, okay, we're going to have to start this new self-care program. So I'm going to share a story that I will probably deconstruct as we go along. But the story is, it was like probably 5 days before my birthday. And at that point, self-care meant checking things off the list. So I had made plans with a girlfriend to go and have some breakfast. And by golly, I was going to do that no matter what. I was really tired. And my husband said, I really don't think this is a good idea. And I thought, I know better. I got my little list. I wasn't listening to him. So I got in the car. I went over to my girlfriend's house and we were sitting there. And I happened to look down at her computer. I fell on the floor. And they had to call the paramedics.
Oh, no.
Yeah, really. And I was looking up, I couldn't move. And all I could think of is, am I going to have a stroke? And then anyway, I ended up going into the ambulance. They took me and the weirdest thing happened. In the ambulance, I'm laying there. And you know what I thought? I thought, finally, I don't have to do anything. And I thought, that is really sick. That is so sick. I have to be on my back in an ambulance before I can say enough. And I was in the hospital for 5 days. Yeah. And I remember a doctor came in and she was lovely. And she just looked at me and she said, what happened? What's going on with you? And I just started sobbing. And I thought, that was like a penetration. Like I thought, now I think self-care is going to mean something different.
What a powerful story. And, you know, for our audience here at the Natural Healing Show, I'll share what self-care means for me in two parts, for my clients and also for myself.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing a medical intuitive reading, I'm reading what's happening on the physical level, on the energetic level, on the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. And then I look at, well, what needs to change for this person to be healthier or happier or overcome an illness. And I'm looking at, what does your body need?
Yeah.
What does your energy system need? And your energy system includes your chakras, your breath, and your acupuncture system. What do you need emotionally?
Yes.
What does your mind need? and what does your soul need?
Yes.
And so to me, there are 5 levels really of self-care.
Yeah.
And then for myself, and this is me because I'm 62 years old, I think part of growing older is getting to know yourself and understanding what it is that lifts your energy. One of my 10 books is called Unlimited Energy Now. So what is it that you need to put into you every day in order to show up as your best self? And for me personally, I know my body type. I'm a lymph body type. I need a lot of exercise. So I teach yoga 8 times a week and I walk my dog and I lift weights. And I need a lot of mental stimulation. So I get to have the privilege of interviewing really fascinating people, such as Joan Shaver, the author of Lipstick and Soul. So going back, it's really important for each of us to look at, what does my body need? What does my energy need right now? Okay, and I had a similar experience. I remember when I was at college, I ended up in a hospital, and I remember it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm lying on the bed in the hospital looking up and thinking, well, usually I'd be in the library studying right now. But here we are at the Natural Healing Show. And part of what we're encouraging everybody to do is to listen and to ask ourselves these questions. What does your body need? What does your energy need? What do you need emotionally? What does your mind need? And what does your soul need? And the more that you can really listen to yourself and what you need on all those levels, then you can fill your well, and you're not going to have these surprises where you get sick. Right? So you have to share for our audience, what was the rest of the story? So you were in the hospital for 5 days, you're still here. So clearly you made it through, right?
Yeah. I want to say something though about what you said that I think is so important, which is, you know, the idea of listening is really powerful. And then there's another part, which is hear what you are listening to. Because that to me is like, in terms of like what I was saying earlier about self-care, is we all have these ideas. I'm listening to myself. I know I need to go do this, but then we don't really hear what it means. So I'd love to tell you all that, oh yeah, I would left the hospital and oh boy, did I really learn my lesson. I mean, that was like 8 or 9 years ago. And I'm still like going, okay, I'm listening to myself. I'm listening to my body. And yet there are these areas where I find I just struggle. I have a really hard time implementing what I know I need to be doing. So one of the things that I've learned and what I share a lot is, how small can you break down the idea of what you know you need to do? And sometimes I go, well, first of all, I like success. So how low do we need to make the bar? So we could say we did it, because motivation activates the brain and encourages, good feelings. So you have to make it so that you bite size it to where you can actually feel good about it. And it's actually a technique. So I might think, well, I can't even remember what it is I'm supposed to be doing because it kind of goes right out of my mind or anybody else's, but I know there's something. So just that little pause, if you consider that little break in the brain a positive experience, because it shifts energy if you're not hard on yourself, and all the things you were talking about, it calms the body when you pause. And maybe to your point, like, I don't really remember what I'm supposed to be doing, but I know, listening to Catherine, I'm supposed to kind of like get in sync with myself. So I'll just take a stretch. And I do know you send those amazing videos on stretching. I mean, that's another idea. Like, you don't have to remember everything, but have your little things at your fingertips that you can just plug into that are going to make a difference.
Beautiful story. And I have 2 comments. Number one, you're what I refer to as an actual human. As opposed to like those statistic people in books, right? And most of us actual human, we have stress, we're living through the time of COVID when our lives are very different. We have families, we have jobs, we have responsibilities, we have bills to pay. So we have all these things pulling at us.
Yeah.
And here we are, we're talking about self-care, which is about carving out time for yourself within the context of all our responsibilities. And I love the word responsibility means able to respond,
Yeah.
right? It means I'm able to respond. And the second thing that I want to talk about is the concept of Kaizen, Kaizen. And Kaizen is the art of making big changes through small steps. So let me give you an example of Kaizen. So if I say to our listeners, you should exercise every day for 1 hour. Okay, that might be a brilliant idea. And some of you will be like, right, Catherine says, I will feel better if I exercise an hour a day. Right. And some of you can do that. But some of you, maybe you're mothers, you've got little babies, or you're someone who's running a company and you're working 14, 16 hours a day, or you've got a lot of bills to pay and you're working 2 jobs. Well, how can you do this? Kaizen. So, example of Kaizen, you're watching TV, the TV commercial comes on, you get up, you march in place for 60 seconds. That's Kaizen. Another example of Kaizen, you take steps. So, and I'm talking literal steps, as in walking up steps. So today, maybe you say, I'm going to walk up 5 steps. Tomorrow, I'm going to walk up 6 steps. So you just add a little bit. Another example of Kaizen, and it's one of my favorite ways of getting what I call stealth exercise. So let's say you work in a corporation, and not that many people are going into the office these days, but some are. So you figure out a spot from maybe your desk to a spot 5 minutes away. And if you walk to that spot and back, you've just taken a 10-minute walk. You didn't join a gym, you didn't have gym fees, you didn't have to get the latest tights or leggings. You just take a little bit of a walk, right? Or if you're at home, if you're working from home, find a spot from your desk to 5 minutes away. And then if you walk there and back, you've done 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes of exercise. So I think if you're listening to this broadcast, you are an actual human. I know I'm an actual human. And we have to be kind and compassionate for ourselves. And when we're talking about self-care, part of what we have to do is figure out how to integrate taking care of ourselves with taking care of everything else and everyone else in our lives, right?
Yeah, that's true. And I think, first of all, I'd never heard the word Kaizen. So I really appreciate that. And it reminds me of something, a story that really moved me when I was, again, thinking of like, what is self-care? And it's very personal, like what's I can do, somebody else can't do, and what they can do, somebody else can't do too. I mean, you have to start with what can I do? And I was reading a story one time that it just moved me. And it was of a woman who was in her 80s. She was in a hospital bed. I don't know why we're talking about hospitals because, there's a lot more than that going on. But she said that every day, what she did is she got out of bed. She sat on the side of the bed and she would put her feet on the ground. And again, I'm listening to how mindful that must have been for her. And then she said, for 2 hours, I would take one step at a time and walk to the hospital, the door of my room.
Hmm.
And I thought, wow, the intentionality of that, the energy of each little step that she was taking, and and she was so positive. And she said, and then I would get to the door and I would go, yeah, and then I would turn around and I'd walk back. And I thought, well, that's her huge, huge self-care. And
Yes.
I might be going on a long walk. Somebody else might be climbing Mount Everest for all I know. I mean, it's just I love what you said. It's what can I do? Like I'd hurt my foot recently. And so I wasn't up and running around walking, which is really good. But like you said, I was sitting in the chair and I was watching TV and I was just making little circles with my foot. And
Mm.
this is the additional piece. I was telling myself, you go, girl, you go, you got it. So it's that extra little, which again is part of recovery. You want to learn positive self-talk because it supports the effort and our brain is listening.
Yes, that's on the mental level. What does my mind need? Maybe my mind needs to improve my self-talk.
Yeah. Can I show you guys something? This is a little prop I have, but I want to show what negative self-talk does. Just
Okay,
I
and
love.
remember also a lot of our audience at UK Health Radio all over the world can only hear. So
Oh, they can't.
yeah, they can't
I
see.
mean, they can only hear. They can't
They can
see.
only hear. They can't see you. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to share something with you. I have in my hands a very beautiful rose.
Mm,
It's in full bloom.
mm,
It's pink and it smells exquisite. And I love to look at it.
mm,
Now, when I have a negative thought, right? Let's just say I go, oh, that wasn't enough. Or so and so is doing more. Or why can't I do better? Take your pick, right? We all have it. Some people call it the choir. I love that idea. If you take one of those negative thoughts and you have a beautiful flower, right now I'm touching the petal of the rose and I'm going to say the one bad word like, Joan, you really should have done a better interview, right? So I'm going to pull off a petal of the rose. And do you know what Catherine just did? She touched her heart.
mm,
I have done workshops where I've given, oh, they all fell off. And I have given workshops where I've given every woman a rose. And I've told them, walk around the room and they have little things on them and have somebody tell you your own negative self-talk and pull off a petal of your rose.
mm.
By the end of the time, we're all standing there with a stem. Imagine that, a stem with no petals. And everybody's going, oh, that's terrible. And they're touching their hearts. That's what we do to ourselves.
That's a great illustration. And I'll bring it back to the art of small changes
Uh-huh.
because we just like you can pull away at your entire being, pedal by
Yes.
pedal with negative self talk. You can also put yourself back together, pedal
Yes.
by pedal, by
Yes.
saying, hey, you're really doing a great job. I'm doing all I can do right now. Right.
That's oh right.
Yeah. I love the affirmation every day in every way. I'm getting better and better.
And you know what's really neat about that is that the brain goes where you tell it to go and the body follows. So if you even just say that word better, I'm really big on language.
Hmm.
Just say the word better. If you feel better.
Yes. Now, Joan Shaver, author of Lipstick and Soul, what is one of the first things you would encourage our listeners to think about when it comes to creating a customized self care practice?
Well, I think that's what we've been talking about, like what is it that you can do? What is the thing maybe you woke up today? Maybe even listening to this talk, like what is one thought you want to pick up? Like sometimes I do that. I go to a lecture or I'll go here and I go, I don't have to get everything. I just want to get one thing. But what is that one thing I need? So I know everybody listening is thinking, there's something I need. There's something I want. So if I understand that idea that I'm thinking about myself, which by the way is not so simple because we're also connected. Just that idea of like myself. So customize is even going to that idea, like, well, what about me? And when I ask women that question, and men, by the way, like, and I don't mean that as a throwaway, you guys. I mean that very seriously. What do you really want? It's usually met with like silence. Like, what? You're talking to me? I don't know what I want. I know what I should want. I know what everybody tells me, but the idea of self, back to customize. And did you say it was Kinza?
Kaizen.
Kaizen, right? Yeah.
Kaizen.
Yeah. It's like, what would that customized Kaizen look like? Even if you have a big idea, back to the idea of continuity, every day I get better and better every day. I usually fall off the horse about like day 7. And then I get
Again, because and you're not the only right, because we're actual humans. You know, when I was studying medical intuition, I remember my teacher saying it's really important to have a foolproof positive thought. So, what do I mean by this? So, when we recognize I'm down in the dumps, I'm down on myself, I'm down on the world, I'm feeling discouraged, if you can have a thought that you can just hold in your mind that shifts your entire energy, then it can shift your entire outlook. So I'll share with you my foolproof positive thought. It really works every single time. So if I feel bad, if I simply think about hugging my dog, I have a little Cocker Spaniel. She's super cute, black and white. She has a little white tufted hair on her forehead. And she's so sweet, and we get along and we have so much fun together. So if I think about hugging my dog and petting my dog, all of a sudden my entire energy shifts. And that one thing, I'm not having to go to a gym, I'm not losing 50 pounds, I'm not climbing Mount Everest, I'm just shifting my energy. And from that shifted perspective, then I can look at life in a different way and maybe think about my self-care a little bit different. Like maybe I need to hug my dog more often just to be happy. Right?
It's true. No, it's really true. I mean, that's why they have pets in hospitals, right? Because you pet the animal and just the physical touch is really great. Or back to the rose idea, like I like to think of, I like beauty and I like nature, and I think it has so much to teach us in terms of self-care. So what I've asked people to do sometimes is buy a really beautiful flower, or have like a beautiful plant in your home that has a flower. And if you feel like picking on yourself, then you go stand in front of that flower, you look at it, you go, okay, so am I going to really destroy this flower? Am I going to pick this petal off a flower? Is that really what I'm going to do? So that, even like, if you think about it, it distracts your mind away, but then it puts you in the presence of what you're really doing. And again, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, that's the panacea. And yeah, that's going to make all the difference. And you're not going to do it, because that's ridiculous. But it might create a little pause again. And when you start adding those up, I get better and better every day. Like within a year, you might have a stretch of time where instead of picking at yourself all day long, you might have 1 or 2, 3 good picks a day.
Now, Joan Shaver, is there one aspect of putting self-care into practice that is more difficult than all the rest?
I think the idea that we have power, like you talk about energy, we do have energy. We have an ability to choose, which actually, when you're dealing with trauma, is sometimes all we have, especially now in the time of COVID. We can't change what's happening, but what we do have is the power to choose how we're going to respond, because our bodies are responding to what's going on around us. And like, some of us might be very irritable, some of us might be very depressed, some of us, and we can't help it. And that's really important to know, because it's here, it's happening, whether we like it or not. But we can choose what to do about our feelings, back to what you're saying. So there's a power there of, okay, I'm really irritable. I might say to somebody I'm with, right now, I can feel it in my body. I'm shaking. And I'm having to make a choice about, do I go in? Do I go out? Do I talk to somebody who's vaccinated or not vaccinated? I'm really upset. So you might even say to somebody, by the way, I just need you to know right now, I'm not in the best, I'm finding myself very agitated. I was actually having lunch with a friend yesterday or the other day, and we were talking, and she said, yeah, you did appear rather agitated. I said, you could pick up on that. First of all, I was a little embarrassed, but then I thought, just relax. And then I said, I am. I said, I am. And then I thought, oh my God, what a good friend. Because one, she could tell me, right? Because we grow in relationship. So the power, again, is the choice of how do you want to see yourself. I like to think of things in a positive way always. Like the idea that we can be positive is like also something that I think is so difficult for people to stand there and go, I'm okay, even though my friend is looking at me and saying, you're a little agitated. I said, I have this interview coming up. I hope I have it all together.
And you do. Now, I want to pull this back, this concept of self-care back to something super practical. And, this is a way I like to put it is if you think of yourself like a cookie jar, and let's say you're constantly giving out cookies. Well, if you don't put cookies in, then pretty soon there's no cookies to put out. So Joan and I couldn't be doing this interview if we didn't put some cookies in to ourselves, right? And, here we are, we're all living through the coronavirus pandemic, the COVID pandemic, which for most people, there's been so many changes in the way we think and the way we work and our self-care and what we have to do to be safe when we go to the grocery store or the post office. And what's happening with family members and our children. There's so many things that are so different. And all of this is a lot of depression is simply pressure. So the pressure of all these changes is making our lives feel very different than maybe our lives felt, say, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So if you're not putting cookies in the cookie jar now, and you're living through this time of all these changes, that may be why you're feeling depressed or angry or anxious.
There's something to that. And it's just reminding me, because, I do have a background in trauma. And so trauma, what does that really mean? It means frozenness. There's a frozenness or a fight response. And so back to this idea of being with COVID and what you're talking about, like, let's just say you're a person that is kind of self-reliant, meaning you really value that you take really good care of yourself. But you've been in the house for how long? Or you can't go out and see friends in the same way for how long? So what happens is you actually have to start reaching. Now, a person that's self-reliant, what's frozen in the body is the capacity to reach out. So they may tend, because they're very much inside. So back to the Kaizen idea, for myself, and let's say in the time of COVID and self-care, I might say, I have to call a friend.
Mm.
And then I might go, but I don't know why I can't do it. Because it's in the body, it's frozen. My whole sense of self is that I take care of myself. But now it's like you say, I'm depressed, right? And the trauma is hitting me, and I do have to do something. So maybe you say, well, I'm going to give myself a week to call my friend.
Mm-hmm.
I may start by picking up the cell phone or doing whatever, but you don't lose sight of the idea. But then you're very generous, back to your positive thinking. I have to be so sweet with myself because I can't do what I can't do. So it's like, for some reason, I'm thinking of melting a hard cube of butter. It's probably because of the toast I had last night. You have to kind of put it out a little and let it soften. So breath is helpful there. Awareness of energy of like, oh, I'm really stuck. And then, but I can do it. And so kind. The words are so important. But don't be aware, in other words, that if you can't, it's not a mental thing. It's not like I should be able. It's like you have to give yourself the body time. And actually, sometimes I think about you, Catherine, because I think, is it the yin yoga? I think that's so quiet. It just moves so gently. And you kind of if you can even think of doing it in that way, and at the end of that practice will be you calling a friend.
Yes. And Joan Shaver, you're bringing up something super important, because as a medical intuitive healer, what I find is that often people are not able to release the trauma unless they have the inner resources in them.
Yes.
And so many times people want to get over the anxiety or the anger or the fear or the trauma, but they haven't developed those inner resources. And
Yes.
so when you're wanting to get over trauma, the more that you think about putting cookies into the cookie jar and asking, what do I need physically, energetically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, being gentle with yourself. Because when you have the resources inside yourself, then that's when you can make the shifts. And if you're not getting over trauma, it's not because you're bad or even unwilling sometimes, or you're not stupid, or
That's right.
yeah, it's you don't have the inner resources. It's not time yet. So this concept of self-care is super important for people who are overcoming trauma. Now,
Exactly. Can I just say something around that is important is self-care, my idea even could be back to the rose and picking a petal would be, I cannot allow myself to go there and judge myself.
mhm,
I actually have a real issue here that I can't move. And that is the hardest thing for people to get because, when you do the work of trauma, they come through the body up, not through the brain and thinking down. So if you start pushing on yourself, you're actually going to create more upset in the body because you can't literally do it. So that idea right there, like, I really can't do it. And that's what it's supposed to look like.
right, which comes back to the idea of Kaizen.
Yeah.
And again, and here we are, I think we're really hitting on something really important, which is how important self-care is when you recognize that you're in trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll bring it back again to small steps. So often people come to me and maybe they've got back pain or neck pain or scoliosis or what have you. They may need an hour and a half program. I may give them a 5-minute routine that they can do every day because
That's
it's achievable, right?
that's
And just like Joan said, when you pick small things that you can feel successful. I
yeah.
did my yoga for 5 minutes. And it's like, okay, I did it. My back doesn't hurt anymore. Wow. Maybe if I can get rid of my back pain in 5 minutes, there's all kind of other things that I can do. So Joan Shaver, let's say a person accepts responsibility for their self-care. What have you found are some difficulties people face when following through with the priorities they set for themselves? So let's say they're like, okay, I know I have back pain. I need to get up and spend 5 minutes every morning so I can walk to the bathroom.
right.
Or I realize that I've been in trauma for a while. So how do you help people move forward?
I think recognizing, first of all, what you have to do, that might seem like not a big deal. But again, self-care and the idea of putting that in your brain, it just like pops right out of your head, right? Like I might have to, I might not even want to know that well, if you're in back pain, of course, that's going to alert you. Like I just had a friend who, really hurt herself. And she said, I had to change my whole life. I had to get up in the morning and do these exercises. And then at noon, I had to stop. She had to change her work schedule. And she said, but it's actually getting better. So it's the idea of taking what you might consider something negative and how to put a positive spin on it. Like she was like in the moment, like it could be as simple as, and I don't mean simple because when you're in pain, it is never simple. It is just, I'll just say that again. And whether it's emotional pain because you've just had a breakup or a fight with somebody, or, maybe at work, things are getting difficult because, again, back to what's happening in the world, the idea of thinking through the pain or the hurt might itself already be something that is different and new for you. Because what happens is we tend to react versus, you talked about the word responsibility, response able.
I'm
It's the
able to
difference,
respond. Yes.
right? And so the 5 minutes that you're talking about, actually, you know what? I sort of forgot the question.
Okay. Let's bring this back to our audience.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's say our audience is someone who recognizes that they've experienced trauma in their lives,
Yes.
whether it was in childhood or they're going through the trauma of simply living through COVID.
Yes.
How important do you think self-care is for recovering from trauma?
Well, I think it's everything because you have to admit that you have it. You have to admit that you're in it. And that's really sometimes the hardest thing. And people are not able to do that unless they're really in pain. Like, I do a lot of relationship work. So even like if we're talking about self-care, it's the kind of relationship that you have with yourself. So if I'm thinking of myself as someone who's self-reliant, or maybe I think of myself as somebody that's very charming. I hear a lot of people telling me like, I look at a Zoom call and I'm not able to get the feedback I need because maybe their gift is they're charming. And they don't get that response. And they tell me it's so disorienting. So without that backdrop of what they have come to know to be positive, but maybe that for them taking it to another level, right? Let's say a trauma, if you want, level that goes beyond just what we're dealing with. That would have been very adaptive. So without that ability, they're left kind of raw. And that's what I see people struggling with.
Right. So let's talk about this from a real nuts and bolts practice. When you work with people in trauma, what are some of the self-care practices that you find most helpful and most nurturing so that people can recover from trauma? And I'd like you to share, and then I'll share what I see helps people can do to help and when they recognize they're in trauma.
Well, I know I'm repeating myself, but I think it's one of the most important things, and it's actually how you work with people in trauma, is there has to be a kindness. There has to be a gentleness. So a lot of times it can be just your tone of voice. How am I talking about my trauma to myself? My heart on myself? Because like a lot of times when I am working with people, they go, I feel so much better because it's like, I now know it's like what I'm feeling is what I'm supposed to be feeling. So there's a softness, which is to me, I bring in the feminine a lot, right? To me, the feminine is so powerful because it's very nurturing. It can be fierce, but it's quiet, it's relational, it's intuitive. And so I know it sounds like I might not be answering the question, but it could be as simple as like I have right here, a pillow. Those of you can't see it, but I'm sitting in a chair and right next to my legs is a pillow. And I put that pillow there because the pillow literally holds me up. It holds my leg. I feel connected to my leg. I can rest my arm, and right now I'm putting my arm on the pillow. When I put my arm on the pillow, I feel held. So those of you that are listening, try that right now. Just take a pillow, or put your feet on the ground and notice what happens in your body when you feel held. Because where there's trauma or anxiety, there's tension.
Yes. And I'm going to, from my perspective, from my 28 years in natural healing, I'm going to talk about some self-care practices that I find helpful for people who recognize they're in trauma. Breath work is really important. And one of my 10 books is called The Little Book of Breath Work. During the pandemic, I've given it away for free to people in 17 different countries. So if you want a copy of The Little Book of Breath Work, send me an email, Catherine@CatherineCarrigan.com, and I'll send it to you via WeTransfer. Now, what I like about breath work is that when you feel overcome by panic, anxiety, or just overwhelming emotions, what breathing exercises do is they help you feel back in control. So even if you can turn down the dial, like let's say your panic gets up to like a level of a 10, 9, or 8, but you can do some breathing exercises and you can turn the volume down on your anxiety to about a 4, you feel back in control. So I feel breathing exercises are really helpful. And the other thing the breathing exercises do is they take you out of your story. So you may have a story about what happened in your trauma, and you may be very cemented in your story. It's like, this really happened, and I'm really a victim, and these people really, so on. And, but when you do breathing exercises, you just stay with the energy of it. You let go of the story for a moment. Another thing that I find super helpful for people in trauma is actually restorative yoga. And it goes back to what you were talking about, Joan Shaver, which is the idea of being supported. And when you feel supported, and I use that word very specifically, when you feel supported, when your body feels supported, your nervous system can just go. And when you feel like you're working with a great coach and trauma specialist like Joan Shaver, you may feel like, I can let go. So when we feel supported in life, you feel safe. And nobody can heal until you feel safe. So it's all about creating a feeling of safety. So breathing exercises, restorative yoga, another self-care practice that I find is super helpful for people in trauma is creating a room in your home. Maybe it's not even your whole house. Again, this goes back to Kaizen, small steps. So find a room in your home where you can create sacred space. And for some people, sacred space may be creating an altar. For others, it may be, here's my armchair, and it's super cushy, and I've got my blanket to cover me up, and I'm right by a fire, so I can make a fire and I can feel warm by the fire. So finding a place in your home, for many of us women, it needs to be clean and neat. So I'm not worrying about everything that I've got to dust or pick up, but just a place where you can relax, completely let go, feel supported. So are there other self-care practices that you find especially helpful, Joan Shaver, for your clients who are suffering from trauma?
One thing that people have shared with me they really like is back to your scale of 1 to 10, and adding to that the idea of success and the idea of creating expectations is the idea that if I'm at a 10, so basically what self-care looks like to me is the ability to tune into myself or yourself and to make that part of a practice. How am I feeling right now? What am I experiencing right now? It's like create that connection. And if you feel, oh, I'm frozen, I'm stuck, I'm super irritable, then just again, allow that to be there, accept it. We always want to run away from what we don't want to see. We don't want to see ourselves like that. It's not pleasant. We want to fix, right? Everybody wants to fix. Well, some things you just can't fix just because you snap your fingers.
Mhm.
So the idea of what I like is I'll say, well, you're at a 10. Can you go to a 9.98? Can you reduce your anxiety that much? Now, I use the word much because for some people that are highly activated, just the thought is like over the moon. Like if you remember, like, I don't know what it was like for everybody else, but at the beginning of the pandemic, it was like, do I even dare go outside? It was like just the thought itself was very escalating. So if I'm at a 10, so the key would be respond to yourself, look into yourself and say, okay, 10 is high. I'm at a 10. Maybe I'm even at 11. So then I'll do what you're talking about, breathe. And then I'll just let myself do that until I notice that maybe the anxiety comes down to like, okay, it's about an 8.5 now, maybe 8 7/8. Okay, so then after that is you watch that I'm making progress.
Yes. And what I talk with my clients is about, and this is Kaizen again, how can you make your life 2% easier? Maybe I'm going to order dinner out tonight because I'm so overwhelmed. I just can't add cooking on top of anything. Or, maybe I just feel frozen when I'm driving in the traffic and I'm going to take the back roads to come home. So, how can you make your life just a little bit easier? So, Joan Shaver, author of Lipstick and Soul, final thoughts for our audience about the importance of self care for recovering from trauma.
Well, like I said, I think if you put that, it's just got to be number one. Because if I love myself, if I accept myself, then I'm going to be giving that out to everybody else. So everybody else is going to be fine. But if I'm not fine, if I don't take responsibility for myself, then who's going to take responsibility for me? Which, by the way, is a whole other topic, right? Because then I'm putting my energy on you instead of picking up my little piece of the, pie and dealing with it. So, just focusing on yourself and some thoughts I have in terms of the final thoughts that I really wanted to share is there's so much to see around us and to learn from everything. And I was watching the other day a show on this guy that was an adventurer. His name's Steve Backshall,
Mhm.
Backshall. And he was going to go splunking. He was going to go caving. And you watch him on the edge of this cliff. And he's talking all about going into the unknown. I really recommend people watch that because it has all these steps about what to do. So taking it really slow and looking around you at nature.
You've
And
been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can find out more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Our guest today has been Joan Shaver, author of Lipstick and Soul. You can find out more about her and her wonderful work at lipstickandsoul.com. And remember that self-care is the essence of recovering from trauma, and self-care is the essence of natural healing. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.